Do eggs increase your risk of dying from heart disease? I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome back to another Dr. Westman Reacts. This video was sent to me. Thank you, by the way, for sending videos and commenting on them. I do appreciate it. If you don't have my top 10 tips on how to start keto right, please look in the description below. Always consider the source, and this video was sent to me. It's a video done by Dr. Eric Berg, DC. Dr. Eric Berg is massively popular on the internet. He's a chiropractor, the DC, and has this famous whiteboard video technique that drills down into the details and nuance of many different things, including a keto diet. I first learned about Dr. Eric Berg when I was teaching in Beijing, China. I was invited over to teach, and I asked the people there was a support group who came, who else they knew in the keto world. And I have to say, they didn't really know who I was, although I've been publishing papers since 2002 on this. But they all kind of laughed, and in unison, they said, Dr. Eric Berg. So this is in China, in Beijing, some years ago, before the pandemic. And so I decided, because of the popularity there, I better check out Dr. Eric Berg. I contacted Dr. Berg, and he didn't really know, he said, that there was anyone else in the keto space. He kind of thought about doing this on his own in his own practice, and then started doing videos. So it was very interesting. I helped him figure out some people to bring to some of his meetings. Years passed, and I have to say there's a lot of great things that Dr. Berg says, and this video is one of them. I mean, I wish I had the time to do. Remember, I'm in a clinical practice still at Duke University 4 days a week. I wish I had the time to put together a video like this. It's fantastic. Now, I'm not so keen on some of the things you have to purchase, or you don't have to, but things that are sold. But, you know, there are businesses that do this, and if it's legitimate sort of products to have, I can't be too critical of that. I don't do that personally. We have a company that teaches that it's an education company, no longer a product company. So, well, let's see what Dr. Berg says about eating eggs and increasing the risk of dying from heart disease.
Sorry to tell you this, guys, but I have some bad news. According to the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine on their website, they revealed that eating eggs can be hazardous to your health, okay? And they actually list several scientific studies that prove that eating eggs can be very hazardous. And I just want to tell you some of the conclusions on these studies. This is not good, guys.
So I'm detecting a little sarcasm here. I hope you are too. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, or PCRM, is headed by Dr. Neil Barnard, who is a self-proclaimed vegetarian, vegan promoter, does some research on it. And they are definitely, you know, plant-based, biased. And the idea here of a doctor using sarcasm, it doesn't work too well in my office, I have to say, but it can work on the internet. So let's, sarcasm here. Okay.
Eggs increases the risk of dying from heart attacks. Oh my gosh. I've been eating all these eggs this whole time, and I'm in trouble. 2021 study found that the addition of a half an egg a day was associated with more deaths from heart disease, cancer, and all causes. This is not good. This is scary. Another study, they mentioned eating eggs also can be connected to developing certain types of cancer, colon, rectal, and prostate. Gosh, I'm going to have to change all my videos.
I'm sure you've heard this in the news from time to time, and it's a use of studies that are weak, and we're going to hear about them in detail.
Change my diet. This is not exciting, guys. I mean, I thought I was the expert. Apparently not. Well, I tell you what, we're going to explore this topic a little bit deeper, and I think you're going to be shell-shocked. I'm sorry, I just had to do that. Before you evaluate a topic and you try to figure out what's truth or not truth, you have to first make sure that the data is good data, not bad data. You want to make sure that you include all of the data, so there's no missing information. You want to make sure you don't exaggerate the data. I have all the studies right here. I printed them out. There's like
10 different studies about eggs. 7 of these studies are observational, 2 are meta-analyses of observational studies, 1 is a review article, and 1 is a systemic review. These observational studies are based on food frequency questionnaires. None of them is an experimental study, randomized controlled trial.
This is really important, and I'm so glad Dr. Berg is pointing this out again and again. And so the words of risk and increasing your risk of dying of heart disease and all this are not supported by the science. And the experimental trial is really the only way to know. And unless if there's something like meningitis where everyone dies and you introduce a medicine like penicillin, you don't need a randomized trial to show that penicillin helped someone survive because meningitis was uniformly fatal. Same for pneumonia or anything like that. Antibiotics didn't have to go through randomized trials to show that they could help people. But when we're talking about food and certain drugs, the effect is really much smaller, and it takes years for it to develop. So it's hard to make that connection, and that's why randomized trials are so important. And if you watched any of my videos before, there's a saying, association is not causation. And so these are observational studies that show association and not causation. Repeat after me. Observational studies show association and not causation. And then what's really kind of tricky here, there are meta-analyses of observational studies, which is very different than meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials. So if you just look for the term meta-analysis, that doesn't tell you the type of study that was included. So great for Dr. Berg to point this out.
Which is a study in which a treatment, procedure, or program is intentionally introduced, and a result or outcome is observed.
The problem is with our recall. Who's going to remember what they ate in the last 12 months? I don't even remember what I ate last weekend. When I was in practice, I would ask people, what did you eat the previous week, right? They couldn't remember. And then come to find out, they kind of exaggerated talking about all the good things, but not the bad things. So it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to extract the exact thing the person ate and the amounts. It's not credible. Questionnaire studies do not prove causation. And as far as association, yes, there's an association, but there are so many variables. Why do you pick eggs out of the million variables? What about their smoking? What about their drinking? What about their medication side effects? What about their genetics? What about their inactivity? What about the donut that they just ate? Why didn't you pick that? It's literally impossible to isolate this link between two things.
Yeah, and that's one of the main problems with any study, the measurement of, I ask someone in a clinic, I'll ask you what you're eating when you come. I have you write down on a sheet of paper what you're having in the morning, in the evening, and I'll look that over. But even then, that's what you want to show me, and often I have to probe to see what you're really eating. Well, because you only have so much time, you write down what's on your mind, or you're trying to hide something that you're eating and you don't want to tell me. That's all is the same at play in a clinic, in an office, or in a questionnaire study like this. And Dr. Berg mentioned that when he was in clinical practice, so I've heard it criticized, and I look to influencers who are in clinical practice because they have that clinical credibility. And Dr. Berg was in clinical practice using this type of approach. So he has that, then becoming an internet phenomenon is now basically, I think that's his job in the business. A lot of doctors do that. Dr. Atkins actually never fully closed up his clinical practice, but many influencers who were doctors have done that, and I can't criticize That, and I'm really happy that Dr. Berg had that clinical practice, the background to kind of know what what is clinically relevant and what is in a study that is just so far-fetched it's not possible. So this idea of a food frequency questionnaire, well, you ask people how often you've had something per week over the last 6 months, it's really going to give a murky sort of set of information. Now, it's said that if you have murky information, if there's misclassification, that's called misclassification bias. If everything's blurry, then you're not ever going to see a signal. So the argument is if there is a signal, something statistically significant, then C, the idea that a food frequency questionnaire isn't measuring something has been proven wrong because there is some association. But what that means is if there is a signal, even with all this noise, see, there's a signal. So the researchers claim that statistical significance means that it's clinically relevant or clinically significant, but that's not true. So just because it's statistically significant, so you might have a odds ratio or relative risk of eggs, maybe 1.2 or 1.4 or 1.5 as an association, and it's statistically different from 1, meaning no difference, then people in the research world of this world says, see, it's important. The clinical relevance, though, is not so clear. There's sort of a rule of thumb, goes back to the Austin Bradford Hill criteria, it goes back to McMaster and evidence-based medicine and Harvard evidence-based medicine, where if the ratio is, the association is under 2, you really, what has happened over time is that hardly ever pans out to be replicable or important in the clinic. Then the retort is, well, smoking was never in a randomized trial. It was an association, and that's true. But the differences for smokers versus non-smokers for lung cancer was 12 times, not 1.2 times, 12 times higher. So if the association, so perhaps you don't need a randomized trial. No, there's never been a randomized trial of smoking, and people say that would be unethical to do because of how bad it is. So that if the association is really, really big, you don't need that randomized trial. Remember back to if you have meningitis and everyone dies, you introduce penicillin, someone lives, and then people some live. You don't need a randomized trial to say that it works. So I have to say the strength of association matters. However, you still want to bring it around and look at it prospectively in an experimental trial, if at all possible. So that's, again, to say association is not causation, even if there are statistically significant small numbers of association.
Now, at first I couldn't find if they were actually credible studies that showed some randomized trials, things like that. But then I dug a little deeper and I found that 100% of those meta-analyses were complete questionnaire self-reported studies. So right there, I can't even evaluate whether the study shows any real substantiation or not because it's based on questionnaire studies. So pretty much puts that data into a certain category, not to mention the conflict of interest. The Canadian Journal of Cardiology, this showed that those who ate the most eggs got a higher risk of cardiovascular disease.
Dr. Spence and Dr. Davignon receive fees from several pharmaceutical companies that sell anti-cholesterol medication.
And Dr. Daviston also had support from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Merck. All right, another study by JAMA, Dr. Wilkins reported receiving consultation fees from
NGM Biopharmaceuticals. Dr. Mentz reported receiving research support from various big pharma companies and is on their advisory board as well.
So unfortunately, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine is just putting out doubts.
Dr. Berg did come out to give a talk recently at the Low-Carb USA Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners meeting at Boca Raton just last month, January 2024. And the talk that he gave was one on conflict, on bias, and it was pretty eye-opening. So this part of his talk, getting into conflicts, you might say, well, what does that have to do with eggs, right? I thought we were talking about eggs. Well, there's a paradigm view. there's a paradigm bias. And if you're funded by pharmaceuticals that are treating cholesterol medicine, you're pretty much buying into the idea that treating cholesterol is important and maybe, the best thing ever, right? Most doctors will give you grief if you don't take a statin and they think you should, or any other cholesterol medicine. So Dr. Berg got into in this talk about the pharma, the industry influence in these organizations and in clinical trials. And I have to say that is important to consider. But if the study is still really good and replicable, I'm not so concerned about the conflicts. Of course, then there's this idea of file drawer bias, meaning if the group is so conflicted, if there's a study they're not happy with, they don't publish it. They keep it in the file drawer. And it was quite surprising through the years in this space. There was a study done in Minnesota where they didn't publish it because the results didn't come out the way they wanted in terms of cholesterol and health. And it was only years later that this was unearthed and then published. So you want to have the integrity or belief that someone has the integrity to publish a paper, whether it is in their belief system or not. A little known thing, or for young investigators, I teach them that if there's an anomaly, that's where you want to be. You want to be studying what doesn't make sense in your paradigm view, because we're always learning about new things. And so when two people came to me losing over 50 pounds, which was an anomaly in my clinical practice 25 years ago, I asked them what they did, and that's what got me into this world as a nutrition and low-carb keto researcher and now expert in the area. Happy to report that the first major clinical research textbook came out on keto diets. It's called Ketogenic, just last fall. And so back to Dr. Berg. So it gets into the conflicts, but I mean, the argument is that the experts in a certain area are going to be funded by pharma and in food perhaps, but you really want to look at the data, make sure it's transparently done, make sure you're not in a methodological sleight of hand, putting the hand on the scale, so to speak, to favor one condition or another. We saw that recently in a study out of Stanford, where they looked at an outcome of LDL cholesterol only as a marker of cardiovascular health. And that's so old, but it makes a vegan diet or low fat vegetable diet look good. So you have to, be honest and transparent in your methodology. And they were, it's just that it was designed with the kind of hand on the scale toward the vegetarian approach.
About the health of eating anything animal products. They're a plant-based physician group, but their membership really is only 5% physicians. And honestly, I think it's really, really bad for someone to put out information that's just a lie to scare people into not eating eggs. I know the news does it all the time. They'll put these little doubts in people's minds, and it's very difficult for most people, the general public, to evaluate that data themselves. So they depend on someone else who's responsible to do it for them.
That was a theme of the talk that Dr. Berg gave, is that just sowing doubt into something is enough to get someone not to do it. Very, very interesting to hear him. I think you probably can get a copy of that from the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners at some point. But the idea that the conflict is there, I still want to focus on the data.
And I think this is just really a smear campaign on eggs. Egg has gotten a bad rap for many years, but the egg is a very interesting protein that I want to share right now, some additional information, just to give you some factual information about what's in an egg. First of all,
here's the whiteboard. Remember the classic whiteboard videos.
An egg yolk, okay? An egg yolk is not a developing chicken, okay? It's the nutrition for that chicken. The egg yolk is probably one of the most nutrient-dense, multivitamin, mineral, phytonutrient substances that you can consume, bathed in some additional protein around that egg yolk. The egg is almost complete with about every single nutrient except vitamin C.
If you think about it, you can make an entire chicken out of an egg. You can. And I've been using that line as a shock value for years. So this even calls into question, to me, the importance of vitamin C. You don't need it to make an entire mammal called a chicken, a bird. Let's redo that. You don't need vitamin C to make the entire chicken, which makes me wonder if vitamin C is really that important, right? And there is vitamin C actually in meat. It's just not as much as in the other sources that you're aware of. But the egg has to be one of the first things to think about in a nutritional program.
But it's loaded with vitamin B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B9, and B12. It's one of the best sources of vitamin A, and I'm talking about the active form of vitamin A called retinol. You cannot get retinol from carrots, okay? In carrots, you have the precursor, beta-carotene, that is supposed to convert into the active form of vitamin A. You have to get it from animal sources or egg sources, but vitamin A, which is so crucial for your eyes, for your immune system, for your skin, especially the inside of your skin, the sinuses, the throat, the lungs, even the colon. Anything internal skin is supported by vitamin A. And of course, liver has the highest amount of vitamin A, but egg yolk is right up there as well. It has vitamin E that, by the way, supports the inside of your heart. Eating eggs is going to help your cardiovascular system. It's going to support the inside layer of the arteries because it has vitamin E as well as vitamin K2, which is very important in removing the excess calcium in the arteries. It keeps the calcium out of the soft tissues of the body. It has vitamin D. Very few foods have vitamin D, but egg yolks have it. And of course, I'm talking about an egg that comes from a pasture-raised, healthy chicken. Okay, I'm not talking about this chicken that's in this cage their whole life.
Now, I'm going to have to say, really? Do we have to have the expensive chickens? Chicken eggs. I've treated people in my clinical practice who've not had access to that kind of food, and perhaps it optimizes the amount of nutrition. But if you think about it, if you switch to a low-carb diet and you're eating eggs that are not done grass free range sort of nutrition, it still can work in a low-carb diet context. And so this is one place where I take issue with people who say you have to have all of the best high-quality foods. Well, no, this can still work without that. And I'm not quite sure of the incremental benefit of insisting on that, or even having all of those higher quality, more expensive foods. If you're trying to use your money to change the health and food system toward better health, then it makes sense to get the food at the farmer's market, to get the free range, get the grass-fed beef, because you'll be changing, by purchasing power, changing the system. But the idea that the eggs are not nutritious just because they're raised inappropriately, unethically, inhumanely, I don't believe that's true.
But the egg is the best source of protein, the most quality source of protein behind breast milk. It's a super bioavailable source of amino acids. It also is the food that has the second highest amount of choline behind liver. And choline is important in reducing fat off your liver. It's important in supporting the brain because it makes this neurotransmitter called acetylcholine to help your memory.
Choline is an interesting nutritional item. And I remember some years ago going over to the university nearby, the University of North Carolina. Steve Zeisel, Professor Zeisel, was trying to get choline to be made as an essential nutrient. And actually to do that, it's more of a political process. You collect the data and then politic it for a while. The reason is that the world was giving total parenteral nutrition. And yet many of these people who are on TPN, this is feeding people by the vein, meaning not through the gut. So if you put all the nutrition into intravenously, you have to supply everything or bad things can happen. Well, some of these people were getting fatty liver from the total parenteral nutrition. And Dr. Zeisel figured out, or his group figured out, that it was a choline deficiency in the total parenteral nutrition in the IV feedings. And so he studied choline and how important it is, and it's added to the IV feedings so that people don't get fatty liver anymore. That's how it was discovered as a vulnerable issue for humans. And when I went over to meet Dr. Zeisel, I had some early low-carb diet information. I looked on the wall of all the foods that had choline. It was basically a low-carb diet. It was the diet I was studying, which was, you know, taboo, and he didn't really know much about it, but said he didn't want to get involved. But eggs were on his list of foods that had all this choline. It was really all really healthy, real foods, if you will, that has choline. So the way it was found out was by the total parenteral nutrition story. Let me know if you know another vulnerable item in nutrition that was found by some other way. And I think that's been fixed, though. So choline, don't worry, you're getting plenty of it on a low-carb diet.
It also has minerals, potassium, magnesium, selenium. It also has omega-3 fatty acids as well, which is good for the heart. Another thing that it can do is it can increase the particle size of your LDL. What does that mean? There's two types of LDL. You have the small, dense particle size, which is the one that kind of invades the arteries, that creates more problems, creates more inflammation. But then you have something else that's bigger called a large, buoyant particle size, and that's the one that is not pathogenic. Also, eggs can help reduce your insulin resistance. Think about the carb level on eggs. There's not a lot of carbs in eggs. So it's a perfect keto combination of protein and fat and nutrition. It also can increase
HDL. It has lutein and zeaxanthin.
What are those? Those are carotenoids. You see those in vegetables, but the bioavailability in vegetables doesn't even compare to the bioavailability from an egg.
Dr. Volek, V-O-L-E-K, Jeff Volek at Ohio State, has several articles about how eggs raise HDL cholesterol, so good cholesterol. So if you want to if you have a low HDL, your doctor says you have a low HDL, eat more eggs and cut the carbs as well. That'll help the triglyceride elevation that often goes with the low HDL. This is called the metabolic syndrome, and we reverse that in a low-carb diet. The triglyceride goes down, the HDL goes up.
So these two carotenoids protect not just the eye, because it's good for the eye, against things like macular degeneration and cataracts, but also protects the endothelial tissue inside your arteries. So no, eggs don't cause heart problems, okay? They help heart problems. So consuming eggs is an excellent idea. And the next time you hear some bad news about eggs, take a look at the study. Make sure it's not an observational study. Make sure that the source of the study, it doesn't have conflict of interest. But the egg can be a super heart-healthy food to consume. Now, if you haven't seen my new resource page on my website, drberg.com, where I have a lot of very cool downloads. So go there now and check out all the one-page summary things that I have on various topics. I think you'll really enjoy them.
That's a great video now, but I wouldn't have included the conflict of interest as a major source. I would have just focused on the weak science, because I've been accused of having conflict of interest as well. Story about that, the first paper we tried to get published, it was published in 2002. One of the reviewers said, we're not used to seeing papers funded by doctors. So Dr. Atkins actually funded our first paper. And I transparently wrote in the funding acknowledgement that it was funded by Dr. Atkins. So it was rejected by several journals for various reasons. It was an uncontrolled study. It wasn't a randomized trial, but it was 50 people on an Atkins diet over 6 months, published in a peer-reviewed journal, and that was an American Journal of Medicine, 2002. Yeah, it's so long ago, it can't be included in PhD theses, I'm afraid. But that started the ball rolling on the subsequent randomized trials that have been published over the last 20 years and summarized in a recent textbook. So I would have, partially out of my own history, the data we presented was fantastic, but the conflicts there, if you reject everything because of the conflicts, I think you're going to miss out on great data potentially. So always look at, is it an observational study? Association does not mean causation, with the nuance that if it's a huge association, like smoking and lung cancer, then there might be something there. Great video. I wish I could be doing this. Well, no, I'm glad I'm in the clinic 4 days a week. And yes, you can come see me at Duke University, or you can watch the YouTube channel here, get information. You can look down in the description and get the top 10 tips on how to start keto right. I hope that's helpful. If you like it, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on further content. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.